Hi everyone, welcome to a special episode in which we will be touching upon Sven Mislintat. We have a very special guest today. We have Ben McFadyean. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Forgive me if it's not entirely the way you should pronounce it, Ben. Just for our viewers, Ben, you are very much involved in football. You have a PhD in German football. You're a journalist, you're a writer, you're president of the podcast Dortmund London Fan Club, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, president of the fan club of Borussia Dortmund in London since
Very
2013, and also the host of the London podcast, of the Borussia Dortmund Fan Club London podcast. Correct? Yes, that's right.
Yes, so you can imagine we're very happy to have you here, and I think our viewers will be excited to hear what you have to say, especially when we touch upon Sven. As you know, a little bit over a month ago, we signed Sven, or we appointed Sven at Ajax as director of football. And it's a big question mark for a lot of people, especially in Holland or Ajax fans, because we don't know what to expect. And I don't know if you've been following a little bit of Ajax, but we've been going through a horrific season. And I'm not overreacting. I'm being mild, actually, saying this. So a lot of people putting a lot of faith in Sven to restore what we've been doing in recent years. So we're not going to talk about Ajax. We're going to talk more about Dortmund, his spell at Dortmund, what you have to say about that. And just so we grasp a little bit of an idea what kind of person we have amongst the directors right now at Ajax. And maybe we can have or grasp a little bit the notion of where we're heading with Mislintat. So again, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to give the floor to you. We always start by asking our guests, newly guests, how did you become a fan of Dortmund? Why Dortmund?
Yeah, sure. So first, thanks for the perfect introduction. It's really cool to be on the show. I actually went to watch Ajax in the Champions League against Dortmund last season, and we got heavily beaten. Aller scored, I think, 3 goals on the night or 2. And you probably remember the game. And the fans of Ajax just took over the city of Dortmund. It was an incredible experience. And it's really stuck in my mind. And now when I talk to my friend, the former goalkeeper of Ajax, Dennis Gentenaar, who also played for us for 1 season in 05-06, who's been a regular guest on our podcast, I now realize what a special club Ajax is. And honestly, I can't wait to come down to the Amsterdam Arena and see a game there and see how the atmosphere compares to Germany and the Bundesliga, and also my home country here in the Premier League.
It's a big thing, just quickly, it's a big thing coming from a Dortmund fan, because we know you guys are renowned for your atmosphere, in the Dortmund stadium. So
yeah, I mean, for sure, I felt that the fans were really committed, and they were just sensational. Also, it was just a really good atmosphere, and also just easy going, chatting with them in the city after the game and stuff, and there was no trouble, etc. So yeah, I mean, that's true. Dortmund has the most dedicated fans. I think 81,000 on average is the highest crowd in the world. And yeah, the atmosphere is sensational. Yeah, I suspect Ajax is pretty much up there, though, especially in the Eredivisie. But again, I look forward to going over to a game sometime. Reference to my own background. So my stepfather, Erhard, was from Dortmund. He came into our family very early in my life. And I was introduced to Dortmund, to the Westfalenstadion, or Signal Iduna Park, as it's commercially known because of the sponsorship with the insurance company, Signal Iduna. Most fans call it Westfalenstadion, which is the traditional name of the club. I guess this conflict is well known in Holland as well as in Germany and England, that the big companies take over the naming rights, but the fans continue to call it by the old name.
Yes, we had to wait a little bit longer for the stadium to be renamed to Johan Cruyff Arena because of Johan Cruyff. That's what we wanted at the end, but it took some, how it goes. It doesn't go like overnight. You have to wait for procedures, etc., to take place. But it's a little bit similar. We know this is happening all over the world. So yeah.
That's right. I think the concept of against modern football is very common amongst true fans who've been following the game for a long time. And the tensions are felt between the commercialism and also just wanting to keep football pure and authentic, the game that we love and that we grew up playing on the street and so on, you know. So basically, I was just like I said, just a street kicker, just a guy who played football on the street as the kids with my friends in Germany. And although I'm British, I grew up half of my life in Germany from about 10 till about 20. And I played in a local football club, TuS Wandhofen, and then Fortuna Dorstfeld as a left back myself. So I got the flavor for the game right up from the ground up, and then basically got myself a season ticket in Borussia Dortmund in the Südtribüne, which is the main kind of fan stand, the 26,000, the South stand, where you see all the choreographies, etc., where the main Dortmund fans are. So I was going there till I was about 20, and mostly in block 14, 15, right in the very center. Block 13 is the main ultras. So essentially through my teenage years, I was experiencing that, traveling to away games, and just having an amazing time, basically really following the club in a time when, however, the club were not successful. And ironically, I moved home just as they hit the big time and we started winning titles and Champions League and so on. I moved back to the UK for my education. But I just grew up loving Dortmund, and about 11 years ago, I started a fan club just so that we could have a place to meet up in London. As I showed you before, this is the fan club we started in London. We basically had a Stammtisch. I guess you have the same concept in Holland.
Yeah, you mean like you go like to a pub, something? Is that what
go
you're?
To a pub, big screen, and we nach und nach, bit by bit, we managed to get German beer delivered, Dortmund Union beer, and to get the Bundesliga with the German coverage and directly, and so bit by bit we started to build up this Stammtisch, like a meetup place in London, just off Oxford Street in the Naughty Bar. And we had a keller, like a beer cellar downstairs. And then we raised money from crowdfunding to have the whole place painted with the players of 50 years of tradition of the main players of BVB on the walls. And then after that, we had our own BVB London taxi to do advertising for the Stammtisch, just driving around London, black and yellow with BVB 09 on the front, which again, we did crowdfunding. Puma supported it, Dortmund Football Club supported it, and so on. And so we had a taxi, we had a Stammtisch, we had meetups, we had our own football team playing football matches against English fan clubs all around the country. And just really making kind of, really kind of getting out there and just putting the Dortmund name out there and getting English fans enthusiastic and interested. And via our fan club, we've had about 300 English fans have traveled to Dortmund over the last 10 years, maybe more than that, actually, to watch games in the Westfalenstadion and get tickets for the Südtribüne and experience the authentic Dortmund football experience, often staying with German fans in their place, being looked after when they arrived in Dortmund, taking out for dinner, making friends with German people, and just trying to foster a sense of community beyond Brexit, beyond all the problems of politics and craziness that has taken over the English game, that it's become such a commercial enterprise, and maybe taking the English fans back to the authentic football, the street football, the real football, you know?
Amazing, really. I wasn't even aware when I had you on the show that all these kind of things are going on. We will be putting, for the ones that are interested, we'll put all the details in the description so people can reach out if they want. Also, we have viewers from the UK that watch our podcasts. So it's very interesting. We'll touch upon that a little bit offline as well. I have a few other questions, but we have to go to the main topic of today. Ben, Sven, right? Just a quick question before we dive a little bit deeper into the matter. What was your initial response, or what did you think when you heard about Ajax appointing Sven Mislintat as the director of football, like over a month ago?
I don't think it's so much down to my response. I think it's more talking to Dennis Rentenaar, who has a long relationship with Ajax. He's working out in Dubai as a coach for Ajax, an Ajax academy school for young talents. And I speak to him regularly. Before that, he was at Maccabi Tel Aviv as goalkeeping coach. And Yeah, and he played for Ajax and has coached in the youth setup and so on. And his son Diane has played in the youth setup as well at Ajax. So I get like feedback from him has been that I think it's Feyenoord, isn't it, who've been sweeping the success. They've been the successful club in Holland, and also AZ Alkmaar as well have been doing very well with their Moneyball scouting scheme and so on. And so there's kind of been a change at the top, I think, in Dutch football. But it seems to me that it's too many chiefs and not enough Indians at the top. You have these guys like Mark Overmars and Erwin van der Sar and so on. And it just seems to me like you have some very big hitting guys that haven't been agreeing with each other and the kind of board level of the club. And it seems to be causing some kind of from a distance, it looks like you have some kind of frictions and disagreements. And whilst a lot of clubs would be happy with a second or third place in the league, Ajax, as far as I'm concerned, is the Bayern Munich of Holland, and the titles show that. And so essentially, I think that Sven has probably been brought in to try and bring some to mediate between different people and to try and get people to agree and to work together and put the club back on the right on a forward foot, So that's the impression I get, basically. And it's kind of strange because I know that Germans don't always get on that well with Dutch people. So it's an experiment to see how it works out.
Okay, let's deep dive a little bit. Very interesting view from your side. So we're going to take Sven out of Ajax, go back in history, and look at how he started at Dortmund. What can you tell us about his early years? I mean, we know that in 2006 he became a scout, then he became lead scout. Talk us a little bit through that period in time.
Yeah, sure. So 2005, 2006, essentially Dortmund under Matthias Sammer 2002 had tried to reconnect with the incredibly successful 1990s that Dortmund had, where they had several titles, the Champions League win, DFB Pokal win, and so on. And essentially what they tried to do was to outspend Bayern München. And that was coupled with the rebuilding of the stadium to add an extra 25,000 capacity by building extra stands on the top. So the previous president at that time, Gerd Niebaum, had essentially leveraged the club and put the club highly into debt. And by the time Sven arrives at Dortmund, 2005, Dortmund had just narrowly scraped out of bankruptcy, or just narrowly scraped along the edge of bankruptcy with 130 million in debt. Now, if you compare that to Manchester United now, which has like 800 million in debt, if I'm not mistaken, essentially it seems like a very small amount of money. But in that time, and even now to some degree, German clubs are very, very efficiently run. And those kind of debt levels can cause you to lose your license from the DFL, which means that essentially, for example, now Hertha Berlin are in that similar situation. And Dortmund essentially had to go to the investment banks. They had to sell the rights to the stadium. They had to sell the rights to media rights and so on to investment banks in the United States, JP Morgan. And basically, they were in very, very big trouble, which at that point they then bring in, once the financial restructuring had been achieved, they bring in Bert van Marwijk.
Yes.
You remember, of course, the former Dutch who took the Dutch national team 2010, himself, a big guy in Dutch football as well. And Bert basically brought in a whole load of players on a free or on very, very little money, and essentially managed to get Dortmund back into some kind of shape. They scraped into 7th place. The following season, they scraped into 9th place. And after that, there was a kind of a chaotic era of several coaches like Thomas Doll and Jürgen Röber, who essentially scraped along the edges of European qualifications. And it wasn't until 2008 when one second division coach called Jürgen Klopp comes up from Mainz 05, and he essentially develops a really successful partnership with Michael Zorc, who is our all-time leading player by appearances, former club captain, and also the second most prolific scorer in Dortmund's history, who became sporting director and was sporting director for about 25 years. He only retired earlier this season. And Zorc and Klopp, nach und nach, so bit by bit, they start to see this guy, Sven Mislintat. Sven's background was, and they start to work in a very successful partnership with Sven, promoting him bit by bit. Sven's background was he played for Luna SV, which is a local club. He's a local guy from Bochum, which is just 30 kilometers away from Dortmund. And he went to the Ruhr-Universität, which is a local university which has a good sports science course, which he took. And he did the UEFA Pro license. He then became assistant coach of Westfalia Herne, which again is a sixth-tier club, formerly second-tier club. And then he basically joined up at Dortmund as a scout, and then became lead scout and then head of recruitment at the club. So yeah, that's basically the history a little bit about Sven Mislintat and how he essentially got into that position. But he was with Dortmund for an incredible about almost 19 years.
Yes, yeah, incredible. I mean, his longest tenure has been with Dortmund. That's true. One question, right? It's very interesting to hear all that has to do with the Dortmund and also Sven. When did you get, more interested in Sven? When did you become when did Sven become noticeable to the fans, to the Dortmund fans? At what time was this, and why was this the case? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's a reason why Sven basically has this this nickname, Diamantenauge, or Diamond Eye, basically, because not only is he a guy who has an incredible eye for talent, but it became apparent that Dortmund, bit by bit, were bringing in one layer of superb talents after another. But also Sven himself is a guy who's a real fan of Borussia Dortmund. He's a guy who actually, enjoys to go on the terraces and watch games and things, which is quite an authentic thing. And it's something which the fans love to see. Same as Edin Terzic, the coach right now. He himself was a fan. He played locally football, and he's very much the Bindeglied, as they say, the bit that connects the Südtribüne, the real authentic fans, with the actual football club of BVB on the pitch itself. And many of the players like Marco Reus, who's born and raised in Dortmund, played for Eintracht Dortmund and so on. So basically, the thing that became apparent, it was over the years, was that this guy Sven was essentially contributing a lot in terms of head of recruitment and chief scout and chief analyst and so on. And remember that Dortmund has a very small scouting department of about 10, which compares, for example, to Manchester United. They have about 80. So it's very, very small, and it's a very tight-knit team in Dortmund. They worked very closely between the managing director, Hans-Joachim Watzke, and Michael Zorc, sporting director, and also Sven Mislintat and his team and so on. And when Sven left, Marcus Pilawa came then after him, was promoted up and took on the position. So it's a club which is very tight-knit, very closed, where basically not a lot of information comes outside, but they have their local heroes. They have the local boys who are people who are heavily promoted within the club, within the membership magazine and the media and the podcasts and so on. And they regularly interview them and introduce them to the fans and so on. And it's a club which is very open towards its fans, but it's quite closed towards the outside world. So people knew already about Sven and his achievements. And indeed, his achievements are very, very substantial, because he's one of the godfathers of the club coming out of bankruptcy, let's say, or near bankruptcy, and actually being able to reestablish himself. And then, of course, as we know, the 2010 era was an incredible era between 2010 and 2014 for Borussia Dortmund. And that is, a lot of that can be attributed to the successful work between Jürgen Klopp and Sven Mislintat.
Amazing. I have so many questions, so I'm gonna pick a couple of questions based on what you've just said about this relationship, right? This very tight relationship, scouting department, the way they work together with the directors, but also with Jurgen Klopp later. Is this fundamentally the way that Dortmund operates, or was it a little bit more during that era that this was a bit special? There was something special brewing, basically, among these different people that are working for Dortmund?
I mean, Sven basically he earned himself the right to be head of recruitment and head analyst by bit through his achievements and successes. And I think we'll come to the players that he recruited afterwards, where you'll actually be able to see the sheer achievement that he achieved there. But no, Germany is a system. Since I studied German history at UCL, and essentially after World War II, essentially during the 1930s in Germany, they had this massive conflict between left and right, between the fascists and communists and so on. And eventually that led to World War II, the devastation of World War II. And then it also led to this sort of horrible friction where they had street fighting on the streets between the leftists and the rightists and so on. And basically, after World War II and the absolute catastrophic destruction of Germany, which included the Holocaust, the concentration camps, massive, massive, massive destruction where most of the cities were flattened and millions of people died, Germans came out of World War II and they basically said, okay, we need to build a system of consensus where we really cooperate with each other, the trade unions with the businesses with the government with the trade unions, and so on. So a little bit step back into history. This is why you're talking to a guy who's a PhD, I guess, because you get a little bit more than just football. But essentially, you understand now the mindset of Germany. And of course, Germany was painfully split by the Allies, USA, France, Britain, into two countries and Russia. East Germany, which is communist, and West Germany, which was basically capitalist. And so essentially in the German psyche, there's like a need to find a consensus and agreement all the time to cooperate. And it's also a highly hierarchical country, unlike, let's say, Holland or England, which are more countries where you can take personal initiative and you can do something which you believe is going to work and you can be very successful. And that's what makes countries like Holland or Britain so successful, is this Eigeninitiative. You take initiative, you make it happen, and you do it. In Germany, you have to really feed into a hierarchy. You have to do what you're told. You have to fit in. You're a small cog in a big machine. And Dortmund is very much like that. It's about consensus. It's about agreement. It's about trust. It's about people knowing each other. If you look at Lars Ricken, the head of academy, he's been with the club for more than 30 years. He's a former striker with the club. He scored the 3-1 in the Champions League final, which many people may remember. Michael Zorc was the captain from way, 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 way back. Hans-Joachim Watzke has been with the club since 2005. Kloppo was there for 7 years. He would have stayed longer if there hadn't been big problems in season 14-15, which I think were largely beyond him. And so essentially, Mislintat likewise was there for more than a decade and a half. I mean, it just shows you the Kontinuität, as they say in German, or the continuity. The president who left just this year was there since the 1970s, on and off. He was there for 30, 40 years, on and off, coming back and forth, Dr. Raubal, yeah? So there's real continuity in Borussia Dortmund, and that is their success. Many of the sponsors have been with them for decades, and even the past sponsors, like Die Continentale, which was on the shirt for many, many years when they won the Champions League, is still a partner in the football club. Signal Iduna, the insurance who named the stadium, have been with them for more than a decade. Evonik has been it's now on the cup shirts. It was on all of the shirts for more than a decade. Puma, who do the kit, are actually a 10% owner of Borussia Dortmund, and they have an office on the top floor of Dortmund's headquarters. So you can really see how it's a stability, it's strong, it's a real cooperation, and there's a sense of continuity and history that goes from one decade to the next. And then likewise, players like Mats Hummels, Marco Reus, leading players in the club, have been there for more than a decade. Yeah, Mats left for a couple of years, but then he came back, and he's been all together with the club for more than a decade. Marco Reus, local boy, and so on. And so it goes on. So Dortmund really try to build continuity and stability. And nowadays, since the narrow scrape with the bankruptcy, they have tried to manage the club without making any debts at all. And even in the COVID, they only made 70 million of debts, which they managed to clear within 18 months. Yeah. So it's about finding talent, developing talents, integrating them, building stability, building relationships, and maintaining loyalty and commitment within the club. And that's how they basically build this academy-based successful club, which has a small turnover compared to the top Premier League clubs, but at the same time is able to fight at the highest level, achieving great things.
Amazing. I'm honestly a little bit blown away because you're touching on so many things. And
Thanks.
truly, as a fan, I like to touch upon that and go further into details, but we have to stick a little bit with Sven. So I'm sorry for that, for our viewers as well. I think they're also very interested in what you have to say. Just quickly on what you said, that consensus model, which is very interesting as well to hear. If I relate this a little bit to Sven in that era, right? Coming up the ranks, becoming the lead scout, etc., head of recruitment, and working together closely and well to spot those, gems come to Dortmund. What would you say was the because he's been actually, if you search up Mislintat, he's the one that get accredited basically for all these players coming in Dortmund. Is that a bit of an exaggeration in your view? Because it's a consensus, it's everybody worked for that? Or do you think he had a bigger share of the pie in attracting those players?
Yeah, I mean, I think, okay, so firstly, I think we should identify which players we're talking about. And I think that we should say clearly that Michael Zorc was the powerhouse behind. I've interviewed for our podcast, which is Dortmund Fan Club London podcast, which we'll put a link to. I've interviewed more than 30 former Dortmund players, including Dennis Rentener and also Niklas Jensen. I think they both played for Ajax. Or Andre Bergdolmo, he played for Ajax, I'm sure, and also Sunday Olise as well. He was also a former Ajax guy, superb guy. And all of them have the same story. I also interviewed Cedric van der Goen as well, Van der Goen. And so you've got some Ajax guys there. And they all have the same story, which is that the ultimate decisions are made by Michael Zorc, or were made by Michael Zorc until 1 year ago when Sebastian Kehl, the former captain, took over as sporting director. And ultimately, I think the hierarchy, the way it works, was that Sven's guys would feed him the players, the scouts. The scouts would feed the players. Sven would do the analysis. He would present it to Michael Zorc. Michael Zorc would make the decision, and then Aki Watzke, managing director, would make the decision about whether it was financially possible. Obviously, in connection with Thomas Tress, who is the chief financial officer. The system has changed a little bit, but essentially, I think that you can say that what was the main impressive thing about Sven Mislintat was the sheer quality of players that he identified. Now, I talked about season 14-15, and in 13-14, Dortmund actually signed a player called Ciro Immobile, who has gone on to be one of, you know him, I think.
Yes.
He's been one of the most successful Italian strikers in the Serie A.
Yes.
And he failed in Sevilla, but he totally failed in Dortmund, and he came in to replace Robert Lewandowski. So there were certain players that came in the era of Sven Mislintat which did not work at all, and that has been a constant with him throughout at Arsenal and also VfB Stuttgart and so on. But the main thing is that Sven Mislintat is credited for players which were absolutely extraordinary successes, like Robert Lewandowski, who came in for 5 million, and I would say is probably one of the greatest strikers of the last decade. I think we would agree. And for 5 million, that was an extraordinary buy.
Just quickly, sorry, Ben, to interrupt you here. I just have to throw some things at you once in a while because you don't pick up what we've been hearing here in Holland. We have a lot of old football players, and that are in shows, football talk shows, etc., and they always have something to say. Specifically about Lewandowski. A lot of ex-footballers say, yeah, but how hard can it be to spot Lewandowski? Everybody would have seen Lewandowski being a good player. Do you agree with that, or do you think it's a bit oversimplification from them?
Well, ask yourself how many players come from the Polish league, even now. How many Polish players actually end up in the Premier League or even in Eredivisie, or Bundesliga? I mean, it's a very small number. So to be honest, I don't agree with that. And I would say that he was playing, if I'm not mistaken, for Legia Warsaw, which was the leading team at the time. But I wouldn't say that. And I would say that even if you discount Robert Lewandowski, look at Ousmane Dembele, who was identified. We brought him in from Stade Rennes for 38 million, which was our record signing at the time. But then we sold him within 1 year for 103 million to Barcelona, and he continues. He's just had a contract extension. He's just won the title with Barca. He continues to be one of the leading players in world football, in my opinion. But also Rafa Guerreiro, who's still with Borussia Dortmund even after 7 years. He's a stunning buy. Came in for 12 million. Jadon Sancho came in for just under 19 million. He ended up being sold for 75 million. Absolutely stunning player. He hasn't done well at Manchester United, but he was a stellar, absolute stellar performance at Borussia Dortmund. And largely, I would say, is one of the players that we're missing basically on the wing right now. Would be just the player we need to bring back again. Also, Christian Pulisic came in as a teenager on a free, was sold for 58 million. Mats Hummels, Sven identified. Also, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, one of my absolute favorite players who I've met as well. And Oba came in for 13 million. 13 million. We sold him after he'd scored 92 goals in 140 games. We sold him for 58 million. I mean, you know, the list goes on and on. Basically, you know, Diamond Eye has an eye for world-class talent. And what they say about him is that he is able to spot the players who have potential to go from great to world-class. And I think that is, in a way, something which is quite special. So, you know, there's no doubt at all that the guy is a very strong analyst.
Okay, and about that, because we're going to the end of our interview, and I want to touch upon that analysis part from Sven. What makes him so special in your view? How can he spot? I mean, I don't know if you know all the details. It's a bit of a difficult question, of course. But what would you say makes him special in spotting those talents? I mean, you've mentioned a lot of players. I even read that for him, for Sven, he considers Kagawa as well as a breakthrough. You know, when he signed Kagawa from the second division of Japan, I believe.
Correct.
Yeah, so there's so many players. It's not a fluke anymore. You cannot say, okay, it's just, you know, it's sometimes you're lucky when you get certain players, and every club has certain players that you get and you sell them for better, they become better. But this is more like a structural thing. So my question to you would be, what separated him in your view? And also, I have a follow-up question on that, but let me give you a chance to answer.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, if you look, for example, at VfB Stuttgart, I know you're going to touch on that with another guy who's a Stuttgart guy, but he basically took Wataru Endo from a second-tier club in Belgium and turned him from a left back to a right back, and he became a world-class, he became an absolutely superb leader in the VfB Stuttgart team. And basically, similarly, a guy like Shinji Kagawa came in, and you know, he basically was able to be the powerhouse in Dortmund's midfield. And essentially, what I think that Sven is really good at is he's good at identifying talent, which is underrated at a low cost. Because remember that almost all of Sven's purchases, apart from Ousmane Dembele, were very low cost. So essentially what he's good at is he's good at identifying players who can essentially make a massive contribution and who are severely undervalued, as I said. And I think that that relies on his way of analyzing and using algorithms, and also using various different scouting databases, and also the old-fashioned approach. What he loves to do is actually go out and talk to the old scouts, the guys who've been knocking around for a long time, and he kind of mixes that with the Moneyball approach, where he's basically looking for underrated players who can perform in terms of their statistics, their data, their analysis, and can slot in perfectly in the positions that are needed. So I think Sven has that. He has a nice old-fashioned approach which suits that traditional way of football, which is about relationships. But he also has a highly, highly analytical approach. And so I think that that's a very nice combination. And on a human level, I think that he was incredibly unlucky to fall out with Thomas Tuchel, who, of course, also fell out with Chelsea and has had problems in PSG and so on. So at the end of the day, I would not attribute many of Mislintat's issues to him personally, but more, I would say that the issues were relating to Thomas Tuchel, who is a notoriously brilliant but also very difficult character.
Yeah.
And so I think that, yeah.
Do you know what the fallout was about quickly between Tuchel?
Yeah,
and
the follow-up at the time, 2017, was essentially about a player called Torres, who was supposed to come in from Atletico Madrid. And basically, there was some disagreements between him and Thomas Tuchel about this player. And essentially, at the time, there was an ongoing argument about Oliver Torres, who was a midfielder of Atletico, which basically resulted in Thomas Tuchel telling Sven Mislintat not to come down to the training ground anymore. And up until that point, Sven had always been coming to the training ground on a regular basis, being very pally and friendly with all the players of BVB, many of them. And basically, it created a big rupture. And that is, a lot of that's to do with the personality of Thomas Tuchel, who is basically a very controlling personality. He wants to control and oversee and understand everything and have total control over the training ground, over the players. And it created a big rift within the club. And then in addition to that, as you may know, in that season, there was a bomb that hit Borussia Dortmund. Basically, a fanatical guy put a bomb underneath the coach when Dortmund were driving from the hotel to the training ground, and it basically exploded and smashed the windows. And that was just before our game against AS Monaco in the quarterfinal of, I think it was the Europa League. And essentially, some of the players, including Mark Bartra, got injured. And so that was a time when basically there was a massive disruption within the football club in 2017, which was caused by these arguments and discussions, and also the bomb attack on Borussia Dortmund's coach, which is totally unique as far as I know in European football. And so you can actually say that, it was a very disruptive and difficult period when Tuchel left. But also Tuchel left after winning the cup for us, but also Mislintat left in the middle of the season. But remember one last thing about that, which is that Arsenal had to pay to buy out Sven Mislintat from his contract, and they paid more than 2 million euros to buy him out of his contract. It means Dortmund did not fire him. He was bought out of his contract, and it was again a consensual agreement between the club and Sven that Sven would make this big move to the Premier League, basically.
Amazing. Quick question about what you said about how he operates, how Sven operates, and why he was basically able to attract those and sign those gems structurally. And it was very interesting to hear that he's basically using the old relationships, the old way of looking at things, but also combining it with data and an analytical point of view, Moneyball principles, if you may. This is something that also, again, I'm turning to the critics here in Holland. They don't know a lot about Sven yet, but they are hearing some things, and they're already, and also some fans are worried that he's very data-driven, data-led, and that his decisions will be basically based on that, and not, like, for instance, one of the things that always debatable is whether you can quantify intelligence, football intelligence, or how you, how you see, how you operate, how you read things on the pitch. This is very difficult to quantify. So some people are saying if you're only led by data, you miss out on certain things. But you're saying no, it's not only that. He looks at the whole thing, everything together, put together.
Yeah, I think he has a holistic approach, and he's certainly using the same principles of scouting in terms of using the analysis databases and algorithms and so on. Remember that he's UEFA Pro license qualified, so he basically he's trained, he's qualified, he knows what he's doing, and he's got massive amounts of experience. But I think what's nice about him is he's also a likable personality and a kind of an easygoing Ruhrpott kind of mentality. The Ruhrpott is a very working class area of steel and coal mining in the past, where basically there's this whole idea of Kumpel, to be somebody's buddy, to be a mate, to get to stand shoulder to shoulder, to work together, to look after each other, like in the coal mines,
Yes.
And so basically, he's not the kind of guy who's standing on ceremony, who wants to kind of be respected, who's wearing a suit and tie, but he's the kind of guy who just, he wears his t-shirt, he comes down, he's a sincere guy, puts his hand in your hand, looks you in the eye, you're dealing with a straightforward guy, somebody who you feel you can trust, like in very kind of working class, kind of real person. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it's not some kind of executive kind of lounge lizard, as we say. These guys who are very clever with their words, but no substance behind it. This guy is a very real person. He's coming from a very working class background. So I think he's a guy who's worked his way up, and I think that's what's impressive, is that he's not going to try to, he himself said the day when everything is about algorithms and computer science will be the day when I will quit football completely. So I don't think that's right. I think that the only issue may be the issues that are in there with Mark Overmars leaving, who was, of course, a legend of Dutch football, and also the infighting in Ajax, from what I've heard about from Dennis Rentenaar. Those may be the key issues. And of course, Ajax is always pushing too hard for success and always wants to be the number one. And I think this big ego attitude may be just what's holding the club back a little bit. And it's the same with Bayern München, exactly the same problem we're having with Bayern. Dortmund hasn't won a title for 11 years. Bayern have to outspend. They have to be the number one. I feel to some degree that is similar in Ajax, although you're working also on an academy system like us, but you are very much the giants of Dutch football. So the question is, can he mediate between everybody? Can the Dutch-German dynamic, which is quite fractured, there's a friction, between the Dutch and the Germans, although it worked with Roger Schmidt in PSV Eindhoven. They won the cup with Mario Götze. So it just goes to show, that it can work, basically. It can work. And also Bert van Marwijk, Dutch coach, he had quite a success with Borussia Dortmund within the confines and, within the reasonable confines of the situation at the time. So I think it can work, but I don't know whether Edwin van der Sar and him are going to work well. And I'm certainly no expert on Ajax by any means, and I admire the club a lot. But I think what you have got is you've got a guy who's highly analytical, highly competent, but also is a man of the people, and a guy who will get on well with the players of Ajax.